Good morning. You are watching or listening to DeProgram with Ted Rall and Jamarl Thomas. It's Thursday, July 23rd, 2026. Over there to my left side, well, actually to my right side, to your left side, and inappropriately, politically, is producer Robbie West. Jamarl Thomas, where is he? Do we know?
He's still streaming.
Oh, is he on with a certain Russian expert?
It definitely could be possible. I don't know because I got up and as soon as I woke up, the wife was like, "Robbie, before we do anything else, you must go get me a professional coffee." So being the dutiful husband, a homebrew is not going to work.
Oh, so it's one of those mornings.
It's one of those days, and short answer is no. I did confirm though with Jeff Dornick. He'll be here at the bottom of the hour. Looking forward to having a good conversation with him.
Yeah, exciting things happening, and we're very grateful to him. We'll be talking to him in 28 minutes, thereabouts. He's, for people unfamiliar or haven't seen him before, he's a very smart dude. He's also the CEO of Pickaxe, which is a new social media company, relatively new, and which you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't, I encourage you to check it out. And to go and follow Robbie, go follow myself, follow the show over there on Pickaxe. It's very helpful to us. And they've been very helpful in helping the show grow and recover from the incident that shall not be named from April Fool's Day until the next time we decide to name it. Okay, so let's see.
There's no point in naming it. I mean, it is what it is. Leave it dead and buried in the past.
That's where it belongs.
That's why Lot's wife got turned into salt. She looked back.
Because she looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah.
Back. So what you do whenever you're going through a trial like this, if your world's getting turned upside down, looking back at what you used to have is never a winning strategy. No. All you can do is go through it. Just go forward. Just plow through. Just don't get drunk and have sex with your daughters.
Yeah, don't do that. With your daughters. Well, if it's the South, isn't that required?
No, it's cousins in the South.
Oh, okay.
We borrowed that from our Islamic friends in Central Asia. Cousin fucking is perfectly legal.
Oh, well, thank God for that. All right, let's hear. There's Jamarl. I'm taking Robbie out so he can go do producer things. Okay, good morning, Jamarl. How are you doing?
How you doing, Ted? You doing okay?
I'm all right. So a little housekeeping.
Always landing on the weirdest stuff. It's like,
oh, really? Yeah, I'm sure. I think that would be true at any random point in this show. It's something weird going on. So all right. So we've got TMI coming up at 10, 11 o'clock DMZ America with me and Scott Stantis. We'll be talking about the effect of AI on editorial cartooning in particular and cartooning in general. Hope you check that out. Okay. So lots going on. We have Jeff Dornick, CEO of Pickaxe, joining us for an interview at 9:30. He'll be talking about Freedom News Network, the role of this show, but he'll be talking about a lot of other stuff related to AI slop and just stuff that's actually very germane to things that are going on nowadays. We touched upon this yesterday. Mali looks like it's in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. We've got to talk about this story in New Jersey. I think we have to put that up front. It's a big deal. And then Saudi Arabia, we touched upon it yesterday, but maybe we can go a little deeper because we know a little more about it. So we know what's going on with this nuclear enrichment deal that the Trump administration is basically, I love how they call it, Jamarl, a transfer of technology. I mean, a transfer makes it sound like just changing buses.
Yeah,
it's a gift. It's like, hey, here's some uranium. Have fun.
Kind of. I mean, keep in mind though, this is a position of weakness by the U.S., not a position of strength. I mean, the same thing's true with
Please explain.
Turkey, with the F-35s. The U.S. held that over their heads for God knows how long. They wouldn't give Erdogans the F-35s. They're doing this because Saudi Arabia is floating closer to China, closer to Russia. And, the moment you get something like the yuan, the petrodollar, in this case, the petro yuan, okay, then the entire edifice that the U.S. is baked on starts to unravel. I mean, keep in mind, we are based on predominantly oil and gas. The Middle Eastern countries sell their oil and gas in dollars, which creates a backstop for the dollar, since there's nothing backing the dollar anyway, right? Just confidence in American military. No, we're doing this because we need them to stay closer to us in our orbit. This is Saudi Arabia effectively doubling down on its association with the United States in the face of recognizing, hopefully they recognize, they're not safe. Meaning you can't protect yourself. The U.S. can't protect you. They call it defense, but does it look like defense as the military bases in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Syria, et cetera, gets obliterated?
And your Saudi ships are specifically, they're the only ones that the Houthis are specifically pissed off about and blocking from the Red Sea.
Have you seen the ship that they blew up yesterday?
I did. It was impressive.
Yeah, it was impressive. We said no. No means no. And what happened to the other two? Like deer, they turned the other direction.
Well, if you're the captain of the ship, that's the smart move.
Yeah. I mean, you just watch the ship get blown up. And despite the U.S. telling you, or Saudi Arabia saying, yeah, it's clear, go. Well, you see it.
Yeah, it's like you're the one getting blown up, though. You and your men.
You and your men.
Yeah. It's not. It is not good. Okay, so it's interesting. I mean, the Israeli aspect of this is super interesting to me, right? Because it was anticipated under the Abraham Accords that Israel and Saudi Arabia would eventually normalize diplomatic relations and become like buddies. And obviously, there's some sort of informal cooperation that takes place, covertly, let's just say, not so covertly because we all know it happens, but they're like frenemies, basically. Nowadays, but obviously the Israelis don't really see the friend aspect. They see more the enemy aspect. They're kind of like, they're worried. They're like, well, okay, so you're going to give, we're the only nuclear power in the Middle East, us Israelis, illegally and, illicitly. And, now the Saudis are going to counterbalance us. And of course, let's say the unspoken part, the quiet part out loud. If you're in Tel Aviv, you do not know what the Saudi government is going to look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You don't know, there's no safeguards in this agreement, apparently, that are designed to prevent enrichment to weapons grade. There's no punishments if Saudi Arabia decides to try to do that. This is let's not forget, this is a radical Wahhabist extremist regime, and all efforts on the part of the Crown Prince, MBS, to try to modernize the country and make it more appealing to tourists and international business doesn't change the fundamental nature of the fact that it's a brutal autocracy. It's a vicious far right wing radical Islamist kingdom. And that, we saw what they did to Khashoggi or anyone else who fucks with them. This regime is, more responsible than any other single force for the 9/11 attacks against the United States and for spreading radical Islam throughout the Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East. The Israelis have good reason to be concerned, don't they? In the future, not right now.
In the future, you can make an argument that there never a such thing as permanent friends, right? And so there's always the potential for something to change in the future that affects the Israeli government. I understand, I guess from their point of view, they want to be the hegemon in the region. Mm-hmm. They want to be the ones who are in control of nuclear weapons, nuclear power, et cetera, meaning they don't want competition in and of itself. And they're going to bitch and moan with the U.S. giving away the F-35s or, for that matter, nuclear power. What they don't get is that the United States is not all powerful. And they can complain all they want. The U.S. has limits. Those limits are being reached, and the U.S. is making deals in order to try to shore up its base in the region. Israel can complain all they want, but from the U.S. standpoint, we're doing this because we have to, not because we want to. Meaning it's not like the U.S. is just giving away gifts, right? It's not this, well, we're just being kind and gracious and we're allowing you to, it's not that.
No,
it's
not that.
We need to pivot in the region. We need to double down. We need to make sure that these countries are going to stay on board with us, et cetera, et cetera. It's that. Mm-hmm. And so Israel can bitch and moan all they want. The U.S. is not doing this because they want to. There's a difference. Like, we don't extend gifts to other countries just to be gifts. We're not giving them this, especially with the level of hypocrisy associated with us complaining about Iran and now basically giving it over the farm to Saudi Arabia. So Israel can complain. You can make an argument that any of these things, even the Wahhabists or the terrorist government in Syria, same thing, right? Jelani's power or grip on power is not infinite. He's very dubious in regards to his position in that country. If that country falls apart and some of these terrorist elements take over, Israel could be targeted also. But they play that game, right? Up to this point, the ISIS has never targeted Israel, which should be mind-blowing considering they want to create this kind of Muslim caliphate. Okay, why? I guess I'm saying the Wahhabist death cult that is Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, the death cult that is under the Syrian government at this point, both of those things could be threats and risk. We ice skate on, thin ice.
All right, we got some comments, and we have a few more topics to hit. FUSO is thanks for the dollar. Now that Israel controls our military and the security state, how many more wars will we all get to die in now? So, yeah, I mean, this is obviously, also another story, a major story for the day. The House of Representatives has passed the latest NDAA for 2027, $1.15 trillion. They, interestingly, not the full 1.5 trillion that Hegseth asked for, but still, a massive increase in spending, over $150 billion additional over last year. They're asking for, and so part of it, and a lot of attention is drawn to this heightened intelligence and other sort of synchronization between the Mossad and the CIA and other intel agencies.
Right.
I mean, it's too much to call it. It's not a comprehensive merger of the two militaries. It's not like there's going to be joint command and control. It's not like, it's not like IDF generals are going to be sitting in the Pentagon, but it's definitely a much heightened, it goes further than I would go, certainly, in terms of, merging with any ally, especially at such a fraught time when that ally has lied to you, misdirected you, and it currently has you embroiled in a shitty war. I mean, so how seriously should we take this? And do you think that's going to make it through the Senate?
I mean, I guess the question is, could this be filibustered? I mean, if so, yeah, you may have enough in the Senate to filibuster it, but I guess the catch becomes, will it still pass? Meaning, will this be filibustered? I guess that's the question. Because if the answer is, well, yeah, it could be filibustered, then it may have a hard way to go to get over that filibuster. If it can't be filibustered.
This is going to make conservatives, right-wingers, very uncomfortable, right?
Is there anyone in the Senate, though, that y'all can think of that actually would have the stones to filibuster it? I can't think of anyone. Maybe Rand Paul, maybe.
Rand Paul lately has been rolling full puss.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, seriously, I'm not throwing shade. I don't know if there's anyone in the Senate that has the testicular fortitude to do it.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, it's true. It's like what, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, really?
I mean, look. To be fair, though, this bill was close. It wasn't a blowout.
No,
meaning it wasn't a situation where it was 400 to 2 or something like that.
No,
I mean, it was only within a few votes that it passed.
Yeah, they got 6 Democrats crossed over.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, though, is if it was this close in the House, you only need a few votes to kill it, or at the very least to filibuster it in the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is one of those bills. I mean, basically, I think if I'm in the Senate, I'm thinking, if voters are paying attention to this, I shouldn't vote for it. And so I don't know to what extent voters are paying attention.
But see, if that's the case, then why did so many members of the House vote against it?
Well, maybe they think voters are paying attention.
Then why wouldn't the Senate think the same?
I mean,
I'm trying to look.
It seems like there's a mixed take on this. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm saying I don't know. I'm going by the House as an indicator of the Senate. Mm-hmm. And if in the House this was a close vote, it wasn't a blowout, then in the Senate, why would I believe that it would be a blowout in the Senate? And in the Senate, you only need one vote to filibuster.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't think this is going to be a blowout in the Senate. I think this is probably going to be, I think the Senate and the House are probably going to mirror each other.
Mhm. Well, I mean, of course, that's likelier than not. Manchild, thanks for the $2. I don't know what everyone is whinging about Mali. This is the exact decisive action expected from a FIFA Peace Prize recipient. So much peace, the most peaceful peace ever achieved by anyone ever. Yeah, let's touch upon Mali, and we'll get to New Jersey and the other comments. So there's this sort of this Islamist group called JNIM. They are not, they're Al-Qaeda affiliated. They're not ISIS in Mali. Mali is currently a military junta. They're one of the Sahel states that overthrew their sort of, in this case, French-backed government. Mali is, it's interesting to me that Mali would currently entertain allowing the U.S. to, basically launch airstrikes into its own territory. I mean, it would seem like that would be a radically destabilizing effect upon the Mali government based in Timbuktu, right? I mean,
Right.
if I were them, I wouldn't do it. The U.S. isn't popular there. If anything, the U.S. is criticizing Russia. This is hilarious, right? They criticized Russia for being involved there, for having mercenaries provide security against radical Islamists, and now they're criticizing Russia for not being effective, and they're saying they have to finish the job. You guys should really get your story straight. What you're really saying is you want more Russia. And I think the people, even if you're a dictator, you do care about popular opinion. I don't know. I guess it
Wait,
boils
is
down
the U.S.
to
asking?
Pardon?
Is the U.S. asking? I didn't think the U.S. was asking to launch airstrikes into Mali. I thought they were just doing it or trying to do it.
No, they're trying to get permission from the president of Mali.
They're not going to get it.
Yeah.
They're not going to get it. Like the Sahel states.
Not.
Well, the Sahel states kicked out the French in the U.S.
Mhm.
They kicked them out for a reason. And from the people who I spoke to on the ground, they point out that they full well believe that the terrorists that are there are coming from the West, meaning the French, the Americans are effectively paying these people in order to do what they're doing to create a justification for the U.S. to say, hey, we need to come into the country and launch airstrikes. I'm saying the government knows that. The Russians are there for that very specific reason of ensuring the integrity of the Sahel states.
Right.
I don't believe for a moment they're going to give the U.S. permission. Trump may do it in an invasion, but I don't think they're going to give permission. I would be shocked if they do that.
Certainly it wouldn't. I mean, no ground troops are being contemplated. I can't imagine there would ever be any. This would be bombing. This would be Trump's 8th military engagement in a foreign country since he began his second term. Obviously, this is not what he promised, right? I mean, it just, I got to wonder what the fuck he's thinking, just because, no one in the United States even knows where Mali is or why it matters. But, they just hear, oh, here we go, another war. Again, you've taken your eye off the ball. You're not focusing on domestic issues. I mean, that to me is the takeaway for most Americans. What do you think?
Yeah, he thinks we're idiots. I mean, well, for one, I think he thinks the Malis are idiots. Mm-hmm. There's that. But there's something unsettling and sinister about the way we do policy. Like, for example, we would deal with the Russians and Trump would pretend as if we're not a part of the war, despite the fact that we're the main proponent of the war in Ukraine. I mean, the CIA, they were going on energy attacks in like warehouses, like Amazon type warehouses, but it's Wildberries. Like, we're waging a war, initially an energy war, but a drone war to kill Russians. And Trump will pretend as if, yeah, I'm trying to get us out the war. No, you're not. You're a party to the war. You're a clear proponent to the war. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the Mali thing, right? It's like, hey, we're just trying to help you guys out. But the Russians know that Trump is lying. The Malis know that he's lying. But that doesn't necessarily stop him from doing that. And even in the process of doing that, where Putin is pretending as if Donald Trump is some kind of upstanding guy, right? It's like, I hate it when you do that. Well, hopefully he doesn't get that same reception from the Malis where they tell him to F off. But it's very sinister. It's like, hey, we're creating a problem. Now we're showing up to try to solve it for you.
Yeah.
It's not a problem.
It's about
appreciating
the American way.
That's the American way. Yeah, but what he wants to do is get the U.S. military back in Mali, back in the Sahel states. They don't like the fact that the Sahel states have gone in their own way, have developing their own resources, have shaped their own futures.
Oh yeah, no, that's not good.
We hate
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, people. I mean, God, when I always, people who don't know about Mali, I'm like, you do realize Mali was the center of civilization for a long time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like literally like all civilization. But it's that history is not known to most Americans. They're not stupid people, I guess is my point. Um,
No.
So all right, well, we got Jeff coming on in 7 minutes, and obviously I don't know how long that's going to go, but I definitely we got to talk about New Jersey. So this is like the worst possible thing that could possibly have happened. I mean, when you were the other day, I had a conversation with Esteban Carrillo. It was just in the afternoon when you were away,
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
he and I were both. It was good. He's always good, and we were talking about how Trump seems to be really setting the stage for. He knows he's going to lose the midterms, so he's setting the stage for trying to annul or neutralize the effects of the election or suspend the results or whatever, and say, look, it was all a cheat. China is hacking the election. Who knows what Russia is doing? They're also we've got the. We've got all the voting machines are being hacked. You can't trust any of that, and you have illegal immigrants voting. And up until now, everybody's been saying, well, illegal immigrants don't vote. I've been saying that. We've all been saying that. And now we have this news that comes out of New Jersey under the current recent governor of New Jersey. She just discovered that her predecessor a couple of years ago, basically the DMV there, the Department of Motor Vehicles, which has a different name there, basically made a mistake and accidentally registered to vote over 6,000 New Jerseyans who said, I'm not a citizen. I'm applying for a driver's license, but I'm not a U.S. citizen. I'm a green card holder or whatever. They registered them to vote anyway. And apparently several hundred of them did actually cast ballots. There's a lot of sinister aspects to this, not least of which is the fact that Trump is being uncharacteristically quiet right now about this thing that feeds totally into his narrative. Another thing that's really sinister about it is that this came to light not because the state of New Jersey and Trenton conducted some sort of internal audit and discovered it, but because the Federal Department of Justice contacted Trenton and said, we need you to look into this particular thing. And the state sort of got around to it, and they were like, oh, yeah. So how did the feds know about it, right? And so, obviously the feds are poking around, spying on state governments. I'm sure New Jersey's, they're the first, but I'm sure they won't be the last. This has got to be a way to, this has got to be a way to sort of set that narrative, set the table for, when he loses the House, he's going to say, it's all fake. This is the illegals voting, and look at what happened in New Jersey and maybe other states. I mean, this is bad news.
Yeah, but he did that already. I mean, Trump has been doing that ever since he lost the election. I mean, I agree with you.
But that's all been lies. This is real.
True, but to be fair, I never thought. I always thought it was possible that a few people that were not eligible to vote voted, but not necessarily en masse. I agree with you.
600 people in a state the size of New Jersey, even in a local election, isn't going to be enough to sway an election.
Right, and I agree with you that the way this looks fits within a narrative that Donald Trump has been effectively trying to paint. And he is going to run and sell that narrative like grim death at the point where he gets crushed and wiped out in the Senate and House elections. I mean, this stuff is grotesque. I mean, and look, we should have, our elections should be clear, honest, transparent, and to be able to be validated after the fact. That's what it should be, as an absolute flat fact. And if we went and tried to pass legislation in order to do that, I would support that. The problem is, the moment that you start delegitimizing the elections, then you are on a path to civil war. The thing that allows us to kind of function and engage with each other in this way, despite our differences, is that there is a vote, and the person who wins the vote confers the perspective of the majority. The moment that that's no longer true, or you can invalidate that, whether you believe it or not, meaning whether I believe that it's invalid or not, I still play on it. Meaning whether I think I won the election or not is irrelevant to me being able to play on the fact that the elections are in shambles, in which case we don't know who's in charge, in which case we have chaos. That's what Trump is playing against. And whereas he thinks that this is purely for tactical advantage from the standpoint of the state and the ability of the state, and I mean the state as a country to function, you are playing with fire. You're playing with fire.
Yeah.
I think it's masterfully dangerous.
I mean, look, when this story broke, I think you and I both recognized it immediately for the threat that it is. I mean, This could end up being you could tell the governor was absolutely furious. And you could also tell, reading between the lines, that she understood the really dramatic national political implications. I mean, representative democracy, electoral democracies, elections in this country could come to an end as a result of a software error in Trenton, New Jersey.
I think this is our 1860 moment. I mean, think about this. In the 1860 election, when Buchanan did not run for re-election, the southern states did not have Abraham Lincoln on the ballot.
Right.
They were already checked out.
Right.
And to your point, JT, elections, whether you think they're rigged or don't really matter, as long as the mythology around them exists, they act like a pressure release valve.
Yes.
People just need to believe that they matter. It doesn't matter if they actually do or not. That belief has to be there. Once that's gone, the ballot box no longer matters, and it's the cartridge box at that point that makes a difference.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
Yes. And that's what they're playing with. And by the way, this was understood for God knows how long in this country. That's the reason why the politicians never touched the voting thing. John Kerry might have been cheated in Ohio. John Kerry never brought that up. He never brought it up. Hillary Clinton, when Hillary Clinton wanted to challenge the vote, she didn't do it. She let Jill Stein do it. They didn't touch it for a reason.
Yeah, it's just like with Nixon. When Nixon lost in 1960, I mean, you can make the case that Kennedy cheated, won Illinois, that won the election. And
but it's not really true. I mean, there was cheating, but it didn't make the difference.
Well, who knows? It just comes down to you believe it or not, right? At the end of the day, though, when Nixon was asked about it, we know that he said this. He says, "No, I'm not going to make a stink of it because Kennedy loves the country. That's what matters." We don't have that anymore.
No, we don't.
That's the issue. The Democrats started this, frankly, with Russia, and Russiagate. This is just an escalation of that.
Well, I mean, honestly, Americans questioning election results is, like you said, goes back to 1860, 1876.
Well, it does.
There's many other examples. Bush v. Gore. Democrats have done it. Republicans have done it.
That's true. But the whole Russiagate thing is the first time you said that the foreigner, the foreign actor, put their hand on the scale. I make the argument Israel's been doing that for 50 years. But they're allowed to, because
but they're not hacking voting machines or being.
Well, they don't need to.
Well, maybe they are, but we don't know about it. Yeah.
Well, they buy congressmen. That's more efficient.
Yeah, true. It's cheaper. Okay, well, I think we're going to continue to watch this New Jersey story, but if it's bad enough by itself as a quantum singularity. It probably could be enough, but if there's more. Oh my God, if there's even one more state, God forbid. And I really do want to know how the DOJ got that information. Before we bring in Jeff, they're poking around. Yeah, they're poking around the Trenton's computers, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy too. It's a federal government spying on its own states. Anyway, all right, let's go ahead and bring in Jeff Dornick, CEO of Pickaxe. And who we've been working with more closely lately. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us here on DeProgram.
Thanks for having me on. I always love chatting with you.
Yeah, what do you think of this situation in New Jersey? I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me what ends up being frustrating is I feel like everybody on all sides of all the arguments end up just taking their party line, and then we don't actually get anywhere, which is a little frustrating for me sometimes. Or a lot of the time, I guess, dealing with politics. But I think for me, the the issue when it comes to the people getting registered, or they always blame a technological glitch or whatever it is, because I deal with that out here in California all the time. I mean, we've got mounds and mounds of people that are registered to vote that technically shouldn't be, or that we need to call the rolls and all that kind of stuff. I just wish that we could be intellectually honest about it. And one side, the Republicans will oftentimes say, see, this is proof the elections are rigged, and then the other side is like, oh, and it was just a glitch, not a big deal, who really cares? And the truth is usually somewhere there in the middle. And I feel like if we could be intellectually honest, then we could actually deal with something and a solution that could actually bring about something to actually make it to where people can trust elections. We're dealing with that out here in California after what went down in LA with Spencer Pratt, where whether or not the elections were rigged, it's very unsettling to people, including a lot of Democrats that I talked to out here, because it took them like a month to flipping count the votes out here in California, where people are like, okay, what is going on when the results completely flipped, they completely changed? And to me, it's not about proving whether or not an election was completely flipped for one candidate or the other. It's about making people trust the election system, and I feel like we're not doing a good job of that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, that California, thing, ranked choice voting comes into it. Obviously, I don't understand why so many progressives love it. It gave us Mayor Eric Adams, wasn't so great in New York City, but it obviously it's time consuming. I mean, would it help transparency if there were more observers, or maybe even the media was allowed to be in the room where it happens or where the counting happens?
So possibly, I think that the issue that we deal with out here in California is there's so many different ways to vote, and there's not a lot of trust in that system from that standpoint, including from Democrats that I talk to out here in California that are around me. So, like, for example, like, you could show up to vote the day of. They send at the same time, they also send a mail-in ballot to every single person. So technically people have an opportunity to go vote in person. They have an opportunity to do a mail-in ballot. Also, what a lot of people don't understand or realize is that in the state of California, you can actually apply to have a printed home ballot. So on top of the mail-in ballot, if you have a disability, or you're out of the country, you work for the military, you can actually request to print your ballot on printer paper. But it's a very low threshold to qualify to be able to do it. So you basically just say, I've got a disability, I can't show up, I'd like to print my piece of paper. So you print it on printer paper, you mail it in, you sign the envelope on the outside anywhere you want, because it's just a white envelope. You mail it in, and then you have an election worker will take your piece of paper that you printed from your printer at home, and they will copy your answers to a proper ballot, submit that, separate that from your envelope, so there's no way to identify it, and there's no way for you to actually know whether the person copied your answers over properly. So there's no checks and balances there. So when you're
who
actually
verifies
looking,
the signature, Jeff? I mean, I was a banker, and we took extensive classes on handwriting analysis because we had to figure out whether the signature on the check was valid and worked, was the same signature as the one on the signature card. But it's an art; it's not a science, right? I mean, how does some random election worker compare, the various scribbles that someone wrote when they registered to vote 25 years ago and what they signed today?
yeah, well, and also on top of that reason alone, according to the state of California, is why the elections have taken so long, is because they have to check all the signatures, and so they're checking every single ballot that comes in. It takes them a month to do it, and this is where it's really interesting, because in the state of California, there's actually on the ballot coming up in November, there's the voter ID, that's going to be on the ballot. So we're going to be voting on that in California, and there's a growing sentiment among even Democrats right now, because if you had voter ID, according to even a lot of the Democrats that are now supporting this legislation, this would actually speed up the results, because now you're not basing your identification of who's cast this vote based on the signature. You're doing it based upon the ID. It would speed up the ability to actually do the counting and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting how even that issue, as polarizing as the issue of voter ID is, where now even people are like, well, maybe that might help us to be able to count the ballots in 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks. Who really knows?
Jeff, you're on the right side of the political spectrum. Can you tell me why Republicans want the SAVE Act? Because when I crunched the numbers, it's very clear that it would benefit Democrats, not Republicans, because two main reasons, right? Like more Republican women change their name when they get married than Democratic women, and so it's harder for them. Their birth certificate doesn't necessarily match their current ID name, and then also more Democrats have passports than Republicans have passports. So your passport is the easiest way you can prove you're a citizen. Why on earth do Republicans want this legislation?
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. So on one hand, I get the sentiment of we want to fix things, right? Specifically when it comes to elections and election integrity and all that, it's like I want clean and fair elections. I would love to, but I feel like a lot of times what ends up happening is the legislation that's proposed doesn't end up fully doing what you say it's going to do. And this is where you begin to build up this problem in order to come in with the solution, and oftentimes the solution doesn't actually fix the problem,
or makes things worse.
And I think with this, I think part of the problem is in Washington D is a swamp, and I think both parties are kind of two sides of the same coin. And I think that dealing with a lot of these proposed legislations, they don't actually want to fix these problems. They want to say that they have a solution because they need a boogeyman to campaign against. They need somebody to raise money against. But I think that this is where it's like anytime anybody comes in with an actual legitimate solution, then all of a sudden they shut it down because they need something to campaign against. It's the same thing with like illegal immigration. For Republicans have historically always been, we need to have stronger border security. We need to deport illegals. Like it's always been one of those things. Pre-Trump, it was always, so and so has a 68-point plan to deal with illegal immigration that it's so convoluted, so complicated. And then Trump comes in, it's like, well, let's build a wall, let's deport them. It's a pretty simple, basic pitch to the American people, whether you agree with it or not. And I think that for a lot of Republicans, like, well, if he actually does this, then that takes away our boogeyman to campaign against, which is illegal immigration that we've been fighting for the last 30 years. And I think the same thing can kind of apply to this, where I think that it's a very imperfect solution with this SAVE Act. I think it may be a step in the right direction in regards to being able to see are we going to be able to secure elections, make it better. Again, that's arguable, I guess you could say. But I think also on the other side, I look at it from the constitutional perspective. Does the federal government even have the authority to step in with election laws dealing with election day? When that is specifically delegated to the states. And this is where it's like, I think Republicans oftentimes think that it's just about us versus them, when in reality, we have to play within the rules and the laws that are established by the United States Constitution. And just because it's legislation that's on our side doesn't mean that it's constitutional.
Well, that was my beef with Bush v. Gore, not the decision, but the fact that the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case.
Right.
The Florida State Supreme Court should have been the final arbiter on that dispute. For the reason that you just elucidated there, Jeff. So let's talk a little bit about pickaxe for people who are maybe unaware. So what was the thinking behind pickaxe? What's the philosophy that's different between pickaxe and other social media companies like X?
Yeah, so for us, obviously we're a free speech platform. The only stuff that we banned is like illegal speech, like the typical like doxing and harassment, like very specific, explicit things. And then we also ban like pornography and things like that as well. We want to have like an actual space where you can converse. I think what really separates us is our view when it comes to algorithmic manipulation. And I think that to me has been the game changer for a lot of people. And I think we're now that we're beginning to see some of the early analytics and metrics coming in, I think we're seeing that it's a lot more effective the way that we're doing it. So if you're on most of the other social media platforms, they use algorithms in order to take your content, and then they will decide who's going to see your content, oftentimes irrelevant of who follows you. So they're looking, it's a very topic-based, theme-based algorithm on the vast majority of these big tech social media platforms. So what ends up happening is a large percentage of the views and the impressions that you're getting on your posts on these other platforms are going to people that have no idea who you are. They've never heard of you. They've never seen you. They don't follow you. And when you think about it, just from a strategic standpoint, it's a cold market, right? So you take your post, you send it to 100 people that have no idea who you are. your engagement rate is going to be significantly low. So if you look on platforms like X, engagement rates on average across the platform are anywhere from 1% to 3%. If you have anything above 3%, you are like dominating the platform, there. What we're doing with Pickaxe specifically is we're feeding your content first and foremost to your audience. And so the way that we see it is, you've got your news feed, it's chronological as it's posted. Then if there's a conversation happening or something like that, it gets bumped back up to the top, and then that way that would be the most likely thing that you would see. What we're seeing now is that because we're feeding your content directly to your warmest market, which is the people that have explicitly told us we want to follow this person and see their content, the engagement rates have skyrocketed on Pickaxe. So if you're looking at X, again, average, I think across the platform is like 1.5%, 2% engagement rate. On Pickaxe across the entire platform, the engagement rate is 36.5% across the entire platform. It blows everybody else out of the water, and it's because we're feeding your content to the people that have told us we want to see this person's content. Like, it's not rocket science. Think about it.
There's a question for you from one of our viewers.
Wait, real quick, before you get to that, how do you maintain that? Sorry, Ted. How do you maintain that as you scale up? I mean, because obviously the problem is if you have 2 billion users, then it's very hard to continue the level of engagement. Or is it? I could be wrong on this. You know this better than I do.
Right. So I think as time goes on, we are going to see probably a drop in the engagement rate as I'm looking at like the numbers and the strategy of the way that we're implementing it. I'm guessing that we're probably going to settle somewhere right around the 20% mark. So right now we're at about 36.5%. As more people come on, what you end up seeing is a more disengaged user base oftentimes, because you'll have a lot of people that are just on to see what's going on or keep in touch with people or whatever it is. It's right. Not going to be as engaging of an audience, but I don't think it's going to be dropping down to the same level as others because of that strategy specifically. No, go ahead.
No, I just said I see. I was listening. I'm sorry.
Yeah, for sure. So I think from that standpoint, I think we're going to see a slight drop in those numbers, but it's going to settle probably somewhere about 20-25%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Philip Blair has a question for you. He's a viewer here. Do Republicans want to be voting? This is the topic. Do the Republicans want voting to be as difficult as possible, like the old Dixie Democrats and their literacy tests?
I don't think so. I think that what ends up happening is there's talking points that they get thrown around, right? And the talking point is that we need to clean up elections, but I think where the Republicans oftentimes fail is that they're not actually looking at where is the actual problem, right? And so to me, what we have to look at is what is the actual problem. And as of right now, and this is the issue that I have with this whole argument. Like, I've been on the forefront of the election fraud, thing since going all the way back to 2020. Like, Freedom First Network, when we were really rocking and rolling, we got banned off of Spotify for talking about election fraud one too many times. Like, I've had all the experts, I've done all that. Honestly, a lot of the quote unquote election fraud experts are just grifters. Like, that's really all they are. They just know how to, play the game. But there's some very legitimate ones that I think have very, I think the issue of chain of custody to me is the most important one, because I think that's the one that fails in almost every state across the country. There's no enforcement mechanism when it comes to chain of custody in a lot of states when it comes to elections. So I think for me, it's like, if you actually wanted to clean up elections, I think that you could make the argument of voter ID as a Republican. I think the most important one would also be chain of custody, knowing who handled the ballots, who passed them on to who, and there's not like a window of time where there's like 6 hours where we have no idea who was handling these things. Again, I'm just looking for transparency. And I think oftentimes what ends up happening is the Republicans then come in with solutions to problems that they theorize might be out there, possibly, and then they make things complicated without actually let's actually find out what is actually going on, what's the actual problem, and then let's fix that.
Let's be honest. This is more about winning, not integrity. I mean, this is Paul Weyrich, back in the Heritage Foundation, said it openly and honestly. We don't want everybody to vote. Mm-hmm. Voters or elections are not won by the side with the most votes. They're effectively won. To boil it down to his argument, we want to make voting difficult because we want to stop various elements of the electorate from voting that will vote against us. He literally said, we don't want everybody to vote. Elections are won by the side with the most votes, not necessarily by the side with the most voters.
Yeah, suppressing the other side's votes,
Yeah, it's about
obviously, is part of
suppressing
your
vote.
strategy. Yeah.
That was his argument. That was the Heritage Foundation argument. It may have been recrafted into, well, we use voter ID, we need voter integrity, and who knows if the votes are accurate or not, et cetera, et cetera. It may be recrafted into that in order to try to make the argument more satisfying as opposed to him arguing we don't want everybody to vote. But I would argue that Weirich was being honest, and that Republican policy up to this point has just been to find a way to refashion what Weirich is saying into a more palatable way for people to accept, which is, question the integrity of the voter base. And by the way, I would agree with you if the issue was transparency and if people were being honest and those type of things. I want the elections to be just obviously accurate.
Yep.
But I don't trust Republican policy on this. I don't trust Republicans on this because
I don't trust anybody on this. That's my thing with this is I feel like there's not like a lot of consistency in a lot of the argumentation, and I would probably actually agree with a large sentiment of what you were talking about right there when it comes to Republicans wanting to make it more difficult to vote, and I think in their mind it's a way to make sure that only the engaged, educated person is voting, and so then they use a lot of these tactics in order to quote unquote accomplish that goal. Because there's a growing sentiment among conservatives and Republicans right now that we should go back to, was it Andrew Wilson is talking about like making it to where women can't vote again and taking it back and there's a growing sentiment among other conservatives about making it to where it's only people that own land or own property or own a house or whatever it is. And they're adding all these things, and I'm like, you guys are, number one, you're missing the boat. Number two, it's horrible. Like even if that's what you believe, like you're never going to get that passed. Is that really the angle that you want to take? Is alienating yourself even more from the conversation? Like to me, for me, I'm looking at it from the perspective of how can we make them more transparent to where nobody has an excuse, nobody can point to the elections and say this was rigged. I think that's completely fair. When this last presidential cycle, I supported RFK Jr. for president, and I was decently close with the campaign, was running. One of the things that he put out there, and he went to a lot of the civil rights leaders, and that obviously oppose a lot of the voter ID laws and suggestions out there. And it's like, what if we made it to where anybody who said that they can't afford it could go down to the local post office and get a like a passport card or a some kind of card for free and do it. Like, would you be okay with voter ID then? And they're all like, yeah, for sure. The issue is that
we did that in Virginia. Virginia sent out voter ID cards to everybody.
I don't understand, even if you're rich, why should the government be charging you for official documents?
Totally agree.
Official documents should be free. You're paying for them with your taxes. Look, we all know, obviously, when you start voting, you realize it's a puzzling, clunky system, right? Like anyone can mail in a voter registration card. We talked about the signatures. Signatures, really? I mean, who's using signatures now? If you move from one state to another, nobody says you don't have to notify the Board of Elections where you used to live. Oh, I don't live there anymore. Please, But if you move your car from New Jersey to New York, you have to tell New Jersey that and surrender your plates. Otherwise, so it's really like, apparently, I guess voting's less important than your car registration. So I'm a dual citizen. My mother was French, so I can vote in French elections. It's all digital. I mean, it's like we move thousands of dollars around in our bank accounts on our phone, and like it's amazing. It's it's two-factor authentication. On election day, you receive you are texted a code that you input into your phone. It's only good for that day. It expires as soon as you cast your ballot. The app is great. I'm like, this is the future. I know homeless people can't do it, but I don't know how many of them are voting anyway. But seriously, other countries do this a lot better than we do.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think I think on that front, I think number one, the one thing that I would caution though is that, and this is what I always say, especially as we're entering into the era of quantum computing and AI, is that anything that's connected to the internet is hackable. And so if we're looking at it from that standpoint, and you're talking about like foreign countries getting involved, especially like China in this quantum race, like the CIA right now is concerned that like if China achieves quantum computing before us, they're gonna have all of our national secrets. So at that point, they basically have access to everything. China's actually stealing a lot of our encrypted files that are national secrets, and they're just sitting on them because even though they can't crack them, they're waiting for the day that they can achieve quantum computing and crack them. So I always argue anything that is connected to the internet at some point can be hackable. I think
the Iranian scientists learned during Stuxnet, right?
Right.
It was like, you guys shouldn't be. You guys should not be work from home if you're a nuclear scientist. You probably go to the.
Well, that's I always make the argument. I'm like, everybody's like, what do we do about quantum computing and AI? And I'm like, honestly, go back to pen and paper. Honestly, that's the way to do it from a security standpoint. So, but I think that there's a lot of very tangible, like, to me, common sense things that we can do in order to streamline the elections, but then also bring transparency. Like, I don't know why. I'm looking at it from my perspective as a voter out here in California. Out here in California, I submit my ballot. I can tell when they count the ballot. Like, I'll get a text message and say, hey, we got your ballot. Your ballot's been counted. But I feel like also on another side, I should be able to verify that my vote tallies matched what I actually voted for. I have no way of knowing that. And
Right.
so
Well, that's an interesting question. How would you ever know that, though?
Well, to me, what you could do is you could actually make it to where, so when you submit your ballot, you either have like a code or something like that, because what they do is they detach your ballot from your signature, right? So they separate those out for anonymity. But then if they tied a code to that ballot, then you're actually accessing it by whatever that code is to be able to fact check it, as opposed to tying it to your name or your ID or something like that.
Yeah,
How could you fact check it?
Yeah, I don't see how you can fact check it either, because let's say you have an election. I don't know. Let's say it's a small race. Let's say it's in a little town.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? Get like all 20,000 people in that town to all show up in like the town green? Here's my receipt. All right, boys, let's count them up. I mean,
well, we do everything.
Do it.
But we do everything digitally as is right now. So everything gets scanned. Everything all from that standpoint. I feel like there could be a technological way in order to make it to where, like, right now, if I log in with the California Secretary of State out here in California, I'm able to see when my ballot was accepted. I can see when my ballot was submitted. But especially if you're going back to those printed home ballots, I feel like, for me, I'm looking at from that standpoint, like, okay, so I'm basically trusting that an election worker is going to copy my answers over properly to the other one, and I actually have no way of actually knowing whether that was the case. And again, I think that logistically there's a variety of ways to do it, but I think also on the other side, there's also the issue of transparency, to where when you're looking at the results of Los Angeles and nobody actually trusts the results of what actually happened out there, whether or not it was rigged or not, there's got to be able to be able to clear that up at some point.
No, I agree with you.
I think
agree with the transparency argument. I don't agree that there's a way to do it.
I think
meaning there's always, as a software engineer, somebody who's a software engineer,
Robbie,
if you're using technology, there's always a layer between you and that technology. I can show you anything. Meaning, I could show you, okay, this is your ballot, this is the result, and still in the system there'd be something completely different. I'm just showing you what I need to show you.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand. I agree with you that it's a problem. We should have transparency. We should have trust in the electoral system. I guess the catch is, how do you do it, and how do you get to that? And I don't quite know the full answer for that.
The banks have showed us how, and they actually did it with gold, because now they use gold to link it to the blockchain, and that's how you verify what gold is that you move, and then that's how you're able to use like the different debit cards and stuff. So once you make a transaction, they actually the gold is moved from one pallet over to another. As it gets deposited in your account, you're able to do it. If you do that with gold, you can surely do that with a ballot.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Jeff Dornick, CEO of Pickaxe, for joining us today. Hope you'll come back real soon.
Sounds like a plan. I always love it.
All right.
Thank
Thanks so much for everything you do. All right.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon. Okay. So let me. Okay. So we got a few questions here before we close out today's show.
By the way, I agree with him. I know I'm sounding critical of Jeff, but I agree. That we
No,
need
I agree
trans-
with him that there needs to be a way. But I also agree
don't
with
know how.
you that fundamentally, whoever's counting the votes is going to decide this and is corruptible. And we kind of have to have faith in whoever's counting the votes. I mean, otherwise, I mean, there's no alternative.
Agreed.
Dead Meme Club, thanks so much for the $10. Oil is now $200 a barrel. Will easily go to $200 a barrel, even if the war ends today. Supply would not catch up in time to fill the gaps.
Good.
That's true.
Good.
Phileas Fobb, thanks for the $1. Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson, Powell's chief of staff, has a story that someone in the Pentagon literally had like 6 Israelis working in his Pentagon office, something like that.
Yeah.
I've heard shit like that.
Yeah. I'm going to be talking to him later today. Yeah. He mentioned that basically. And I think it was John mentioned that too, though. Like the Israelis were.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Well, I thought John said that like every member of the House of Representatives had their own pet Israeli?
They do.
Or they're the pet, more to the point.
That they have minders. Thomas Massey made that point, saying that all of these guys have Israeli minders that check in with them, that work with them, that monitor what they're doing in regards to policy. Yeah.
Disgusting. Manchild, fuck elections. Thanks for the $1. Cage match to the death. At least there will be some good, clean fun. And we already know how to do it. We can do it, set up the octagon on the White House lawn. It'll be awesome.
We can just leave it there.
just have it be permanent, right?
I back those.
Yeah, I'm not against that. Okay, the hosts, Ebody Mopar, the hosts are confusing Republican elites with Republican voters. Republican elites are closer to Democrats. Republicans are fighting their elite more than Democrats. I mean, to some extent, in the same Democratic voters are fighting their Democratic elites as well, though. Philip Blair, Trump wants people to believe the 2026 midterm elections will have been stolen. If he does, why is he trying to make everyone disgusted with his stewardship of the U.S. presidency?
Because he doesn't care. Look, if the president comes out and just says, yeah, these elections are stolen, then it doesn't matter how bad his stewardship was. I mean, and I think it's 2 points. One, Trump is not going to be elected again. So I don't even know if he cares. He may care about legacy.
He might care about not wanting to, deal with House investigations next year.
That also, right?
I mean, think about all the grifting he's been doing. He doesn't want to be answering questions about that stuff.
And he wants to be able to keep the money that he's stolen.
It's quite a bit too.
Yeah, meaning he doesn't want to be arrested. Like after he's.
Who would? All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jamarl. Thanks, Robbie. We will be back tomorrow for the end of the week, Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Stay tuned for TMI show coming up right now. DMZ with Scott Stantis and myself. We'll be talking about cartooning and the effect of AI on the profession. I think it's going to be pretty profound. Anyway, all right. Thanks, JT. See you tomorrow.
Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.